TV studios and Terry Bell for today's community comment.
Thank you so much, Jake. Today we're glad to be welcomed by State Representative Mark Bourne, who's had a very busy week, a floor session in the State Assembly, deer hunting's coming up, and all kinds of things to talk about. And so thanks so much for joining us, Mark.
Good to be here.
Absolutely. If you have a question or a comment for Mark, this is a great opportunity to have a conversation with him. You can call us or text us at 920-887-9595, or you can call our studio line at 885-4446. Mentioned a bunch of things we're going to talk about, but to start off the show, I think this being Beaver Dam in 2025, we should probably talk about the data center, since that's all anybody can talk about lately. And I thought this might be a good opportunity to talk about your role in that and your feelings about the project.
Yeah, so while my role in the actual, now announced Meta data center here in Beaver Dam is pretty minimal. It's not really something that the state was heavily involved in. That was a local project. But I think, first maybe to take a step back more globally on it, I think, the state has been trying to be a great place to do business for, more than a decade now of Republican-controlled legislature. And so we certainly have done things tax-wise and things like that to try to bring major investments like this to the state of Wisconsin. And so I think, that's probably the first point I want to make is it's a great thing that we have this, cutting edge technology, the future of development happening here in Wisconsin now in several places. The first one was down in the southeast, but now there's a couple more that are going on, and we've got one happening right here in Beaver Dam. So just from a economic development perspective statewide, it's a good thing to be on the cutting edge of stuff and not have this just happening in other places, but happening here in Wisconsin. It keeps us economically competitive. There's always constantly businesses growing, changing, some businesses leaving, some businesses coming. And so I was just reading a couple of days ago about this boom right now in these AI data centers in a Wall Street Journal article, and kind of how much investment's being made and how the stock market's reacting to it and where all the money's coming from and things. And so this is just the biggest growing industry or business, I guess, whichever you want to call it, in the nation right now. And it's good that Wisconsin is playing a role in that, and some of it's happening right here in Beaver Dam. I think that certainly understand some of the concerns folks had, not knowing all the information. More of that information is out there now. That's a good thing. But I also think that some of it is just folks don't like change. Folks don't like new things. And that's just the way it is sometimes. I think about it's more than 20 years ago now that the Walmart Distribution Center was, coming to Beaver Dam. And that was controversial at the time, and people were upset at the city council about that, and there was a lawsuit, and lots of angst and drama about that. And that's been a perfectly good community partner. I think everything we've seen here in the last couple of weeks from Meta is that they're looking to be a good community partner, and those are all good things. And so I appreciate, I think, the leadership of the council on this. Just from a local resident's perspective, maybe. I grew up here in Beaver Dam. I still live here, raising my family here, and I think it's good that they were able to land a big project like this, and it'll be good for the tax base, and then it looks like a good community partner for the future. And so a lot of positive things there, and it's reasonable for people to have questions. But a lot of those have been answered now as far as like water usage and the utilities, and there's been some amazing things really that I was surprised to learn even in the last couple of weeks from the Ducks Unlimited partnership for some habitat restoration, and just a lot of good things that can go on in that project site. And so I'm excited about the future, and if folks have more things that they need to learn about it, I certainly encourage them to do that. But I think as people learn about this project and the real information about this project, it's hard not to be excited for the future. And I, in some ways, maybe I wish I got to play more of a role in it, but really it's a lot of credit to a lot of local people. And on the few things that I was able to help with, like doing general stuff to make sure that this state is more competitive, to bring in businesses like this. And then, as we've talked about before on the show, we did do a TIF district bill that's really more about the future of Beaver Dam than this project. But
Well, tell me about that TID district
Yeah.
bill and how it does and does not affect this project.
yeah, it doesn't really affect this project in any way. I mean, if we look at the timeline of this project, the TIF district was created, I'm guessing, probably 5 or 6 months before my bill was signed into law. But what the bill does is there's limits on how much property a municipality can have tied up in a TIF district. And because this project is so big, it would have exceeded that value. It's a 12% value of the city is what the law is. And so the bill exempts this project so that way the city can do future TIF districts. And so then they can do another, like a residential TID, like the one that's been very successful on kind of the Oldinger Road area there on the edge of town right now. Or another industrial park, which we have had several industrial parks be very successful in Beaver Dam, and the one we have now is getting fairly full. And so the city wants to look at future development. And so this bill really was about the future development, not about this one. But TIF law is confusing, and it says it says data center in it, so people are pretty confused. So, but that's been good because people have contacted the office. A handful of folks have called and said, "What about this bill?" And it's been good to be able to walk through it with folks and take this opportunity here to do that. But that really didn't play a role in this project at all because of what the bill actually does. This project caused the need for the bill. Happy to do the bill so that we can continue to do future development here in the city.
And Beaver Dam can continue to be in the TID district business.
Right. Yeah.
Another, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, another state law or state adjustment was the sales taxes that Meta will not have to pay on purchases that have to do with building this, or is it the construction companies?
No, it's more the law. I think the sales tax that you're referring to is exempting their equipment from the sales tax, and that's what I kind of started out my remarks with, and that's one of the specific examples of it. But we've been trying to do things to make the state more competitive tax-wise or regulatory-wise, and that's a key example of the tax stuff that we did 3 years ago, I think, 2 budgets ago, to exempt some of that sales tax from companies that bring data centers or similar type things like that to Wisconsin. And so, that's one of the key things that opened up this market. So now we have this, key rising market that I was talking about nationally coming to Wisconsin. And so, there are, as I started to learn more about this project and kind of just started looking around to see, when I heard that it was going to be Meta, I started searching where their most recent projects were, and they've been in the Midwest. They're in Iowa, they're in Illinois. One of their most recent ones was in the Kansas City area. And so it's good that Wisconsin is now competitive for these so that we're not just putting all of this growth in other states. And so, it was kind of the vision of both the city and Alliant Energy when they started this. That's the other thing that I think about sometimes when I hear people saying how rushed this was. Folks got to remember, in many ways, this started back in like 2017, 2018. Alliant Energy had done commerce parks in other states and was looking to do one here, and so they got options on this land out in the town of Beaver Dam, town of Trenton area. And I was at a groundbreaking for that commerce park, I think they were calling it at the time, with brand new Governor Evers in his first year in office back in 2018. And it wasn't a secret then that they were trying to find some high user, large, that's why they're putting so much land together. They wanted to bring in a large company that would have a significant impact on economic development in the area. And no one knew what it was going to be then, and data centers weren't growing at the way they are now. And so probably that wasn't what people were thinking of, but they were thinking of a large factory and a high energy user. And so that was already being discussed and promoted on local radio and local newspaper as the groundbreaking happened and things like that. And, Madison area media was there, of course, with the governor there. And that's going all the way back 7-8 years. And just as this grew and those options expanded into even more area, and the city council started to take action last year. There has been information, and not all of the details. All the details were released here in the last couple of weeks, but there had been information along the way, from annexation to creating the TIF district to the developers agreement and what that was going to be for a data center. And even some media sources were reporting back in the spring already that it was speculated that it was going to be Meta. So that name's been out there for probably 6 months or better already, even though it was just confirmed here recently. So there's been a fair amount of discussion and information going back, almost a decade on this property. So it's great to see that early leadership by the city and Alliant Energy has worked out and has brought what I'm certainly hopeful will be a great new community partner to Beaver Dam.
You hear a lot from people. It's a big part of your job to be listening to what people have to say. And I'm sure you hear plenty from people on both sides of this. And I'm going to assume everybody's motives are 100% good. But is there anything out there that you're hearing on a consistent basis that people misunderstand or don't understand completely that you would wish to clear up?
There's been, unfortunately, with this project, there's been a fair amount of it, and there's been a lot of exaggeration or expectations on water usage that just don't appear to be real. There isn't anything to indicate that that's the level of water that's going to be used. I think even if you, like I said, I did some just basic Google searches when I heard it was going to be Meta, and you look at where they've opened some of their more recent facilities in Illinois and in Missouri. And all of the stories on that are about the closed systems for water use, and it's using less water than these data centers have historically used, and things like that, and lots of positive stories about helping to create fab labs in local school districts and community involvement, and through their charitable arm and things like that. And so it's been a lot of it was not hard to find a lot of positive information, which was good. And that's what you would hope for, because a lot of the rumors or assumptions are so negative, and so it's important to look at the facts. That's what the city council had to do, and so I think that was, I appreciate their leadership on that, and I hope that folks, as they start to take a closer look at this, I know that I think it was last week was the Chamber's Economic Update Luncheon. I know that you were there covering it. There was a good crowd of folks, and a lot of people stuck around afterwards to hear a presentation from Meta. And I heard a lot of feedback after that where folks were curious. Obviously, it's a huge project, but once they got to see some of that information and see some of the data and things that to dispel some of the rumors, they were kind of like, "Wow, this is pretty impressive. This is really a great thing." And glad to have some of that reassurance. This was never a threat to the lake. This was never something that was a threat to our city water supply. We have people that run our city water utility. They were earlier this year already in local stories saying that we are fully capable of handling, the water supply here. This is not a concern. This is not something that we don't have capacity for. But some folks have not wanted to hear that. They wanted to believe what they want to believe, and I guess that's a person's right. But it's unfortunate that sometimes we can't. It's fine to have questions. It's fine to be curious. There's nothing wrong with that. But then ask your questions, gather your information. And also I think that in some ways this is just a general distrust that's happened in our society, but just this distrust of local officials and things is really getting to be concerning. I don't agree with everything that the city council does. I don't ever agree with everything that this mayor or other mayors have done. But for the most part, I know that they're trying to do what's best for the city, and I have more trust and respect for that work. And especially when you look at some of the staff, the city attorney is someone who I've worked with years ago in the legislature. I know he's, a top-notch fella. Trent Campbell has been doing economic development in this area for a long time. And we have all of these successful industrial parks. We've got the great Generac facility is one of the newest examples of that, the things that he's helped bring to this community. And so I know that we've got good leaders at City Hall that are trying to do the right thing for the community. I think it's an incredible blessing that they were able to recruit a project like this at this key state-of-the-art type of technology that's growing so rapidly across the country now, and have, when you look at between that and Generac and the distribution center, those are three really strong companies right now on a national stage, and to have those type of products or businesses based here in Beaver Dam is just a good thing for the future of the community.
All right, we're talking with State Representative Mark Bourne on Community Comment. We need to take a break, but we will be right back. Again, you're listening to Community Comment on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge.
Comment here on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge. Here's Terry Bell.
Thank you so much, Jake. We're talking to State Representative Mark Bourne on Community Comment today. If you have a question or a comment, please give us a call or a text at 920-887-9595, or you can call our studio line at 885-4446. We're getting close to the holidays, Mark, and I think that's a time of year when working the legislature takes a short pause a little bit, but there's still some work to be done between now and Christmas.
Yeah, it's actually, so we just wrapped up the fall session, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but that ended yesterday. And so the legislature will not be in session again until after the first of the year. But so while that's a pause from floor periods, as you indicated there, I think a lot of folks are sometimes, curious or confused about it. It's not like we're off for more than a month. This actually becomes, because of the holidays, one of the busiest times in the legislature, because
Really? Okay.
the committee work has to go on to prepare the bills for the January, February, March floor period. And so when you are a legislator trying to get legislation done and you're realizing you're coming into your last floor period, like, you've got to get the bills ready. And so there's a big push here in the last few days of November and certainly in the early part of December before Christmas to try to get as many public hearings, executive sessions. So it's the first 3 weeks of December is usually kind of a crazy month with committee work trying to prepare that legislation for the January and February floor periods. Because if you don't get it through a committee, by the end of January, there's no way it's going to happen. And so you're really pushing hard now here before the end of the year to at least get that hearing so you can try to get it voted out of committee in January and onto that one of those floor periods in January and February. So it's definitely not much of a break for most legislators.
Okay.
It just means that we're not on the floor taking votes, but there's a lot that goes on behind the scene to prepare for that next floor session.
Anything coming up in committee that you think is going to generate a lot of interest in the spring session?
I think that we're struggling with trying to figure out how we can have a positive impact on property taxes. They're just climbing so fast. So I think that's something that's going to be heavily debated. I think there's some important things like stewardship that needs to be settled yet. That's been working its way through the process. So I'm sure there'll be some things that get some attention, but I think we'll have a better idea by the end of the year on what those are as we see what kind of comes out of the committee work in the first few weeks of December.
All right, very good. We have to take a break now for the news, but we will be right back. You are listening to Community Comment on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge.
Daily Dodge, here's Terry Bell.
Thank you very much, Jake. We're talking to State Representative Mark Bourne on this edition of Community Comment. If you have any questions or comments for Mark, the show is called Community Comments, so give us a call or a text at 920-887-9595, or you can call our studio line at 885-4446. As we mentioned before the break, the floor session for the fall is just recently wrapped up. The last floor session was this week. And let us know about what you were able to get accomplished.
Yeah, there were quite a few bills, but I think there was, two key areas that we focused on for the most part this week. One was school consolidation opportunities, and then the other was elections. And so on the school side, the reality is we got about 70% of our districts that are declining enrollment throughout the state. We've got, 420 some districts. We've got a lot of districts. Some of it is certainly becoming an economies of scale type challenge. As these schools get smaller, it's harder to provide all the things that are expected now, I guess, in some ways from, fab labs and stuff to help with developing that sort of a workforce versus AP classes and things, and dual enrollment type classes to help students get ahead out in college. And, there's just a lot of stuff that, a lot of great stuff that's really growing since you and I were in school, but costs money, and as resources get tougher, especially in these small districts, that's something that's a challenge. So we put forward a series of bills to try to help with incentivizing and helping to ease some of the challenges with schools consolidating. Now, these are completely voluntary. At this point, we are not doing like some other states have done and trying to force consolidation. We respect the local control here in Wisconsin. We've got these 400 and can't remember now if it's 21 or 26. Both those numbers are in my head for some reason. So we'll say 420 some school districts throughout Wisconsin, and they have local control through their school boards. But we wanted to help, provide some opportunities. We saw this since I've been in office about maybe 10 years ago, where some of the K through 8s in eastern Dodge County, it was Neosho, Rubicon, and Herman schools consolidated to Honor Elementary now. It's still a K through 8, but 3 K through 8s consolidated into one, and it made them a lot stronger financially because they were getting so small they just couldn't keep all 3 schools going anymore in those areas. And so these incentives will help provide additional resources per pupil. Also, they'll help with smoothing some of the transitions when you have mill rates or things that are greatly different between the districts, and just provide those opportunities to again, local schools are still going, communities are still going to have to decide, but especially in our northern and western parts of the state where schools are really getting a lot smaller. There's some in this area too that are quite frankly are challenged with. You see some of them that have graduating classes that are 50 students and kindergarten classes that are 25. That's eventually going to have quite an impact on your school as your classes are half the size of what you're used to graduating. And so, just trying to find ways to be helpful, because we can recognize these demographic challenges are a reality. We're just not having as many students coming into our schools. We're not having as many students graduating from them and going to higher ed. And these are all things that the state's trying to find a way to be a helpful partner in. And so I think these are steps in the right direction, and whether or not they will be some of the key things that help some districts figure this out, I think time will tell, but hopefully it will.
One issue that comes up when people talk about consolidation is long bus rides for kids, and just the geographic challenges of having kids from a wider geographic area be part of one school. I'm sure those are all parts of those conversations.
Yeah, and that's also why this isn't it never is a one size fits all situation for this when it comes to schools in Wisconsin. That's part of why statewide policy on schools is so challenging, because even when I look at the districts in my area, in the 37th Assembly District, there are such wide differences at times in the challenges or the issues between them. And then when you get into more rural areas, it gets to be even more so. But that's also why we have things like sparsity aid and high-cost transportation aid, where not every school gets those. You have to be, to put it kind of generally, super rural and have big areas of bus travel to qualify for those. There's a more specific criteria, but that's kind of the general sense of what those things do. And, so that's part of that. Because, you look at like Florence County. I mean, I think they've got one school district up there. Well, they're probably not going to have anyone else to consolidate with. And that's going to be a small school district. And so we do have to find ways to manage that as well. And that's what those are for. But there's some where, folks are close by, and especially in western Wisconsin, there's getting to be more and more of that, where the northern stuff, you're right, some of it does get to be too far. But there are several of my colleagues in western Wisconsin that talk about how it's just a couple of miles between these school districts. And, some of it I get. I mean, when I first was elected, Horicon and Mayville took a real serious look at consolidating. They had 2 retiring superintendents. They spoke with Senator Fitzgerald at the time and myself about it. And financially, because of the incentives from the state to consolidate, it was a no-brainer. It would have been great for them financially. And it was the time to do it with those superintendents retiring. But the communities didn't want to do it. And at the end of the day, that's fine. If your community wants to keep paying for your school, that's okay. We just want folks to know that there's other options. And so, when they tested that with Horicon and Mayville, they found out that they spent a lifetime, several generations, making Marshmen hate Cardinals and Cardinals hate Marshmen, and that wasn't going to work. But at some places, those schools have since passed referendums and are in very strong shape. Not every school in Wisconsin is in that position. And so we want to make sure that there are other tools, that if the community doesn't want to pass a referendum to support their super small school, that, the economies of scale are challenging, well, then here are other options for the school board to look at.
Yeah, you mentioned the state doesn't want to force communities to do what they don't want to do, but what is in these bills that would, give a community a pause to think about, hey, maybe consolidating would work for us?
Yeah, it's the financial incentive is always the key, and so that's it's an additional per pupil amounts. I focus more on the bigger parts of it, but there's even some incentives for grade sharing if they wanted to do that, where you could just have your middle schools maybe consolidate if you're close by, and keep your elementary schools separate, or maybe just have your high school consolidate with some of the grade sharing. So there's different ways that school boards could do this. We're trying to provide a variety of tools, and money's the incentive. I mean, that's really the primary motivator when it comes to schools.
So I'm hearing you correctly. You could have students like in the same elementary school or same middle school who will go on to different high schools.
Yeah, I mean, that could be an option, or maybe it's even just specific classes. Maybe it's just AP. Maybe 3 districts want to get together and offer AP classes at only one of the schools, and then they bus some students for that. I mean, I think they can be innovative. There's schools that do it with administrators already. Randolph and Cambria-Friesland are doing that right now with a superintendent. Schools do it with sports. Those have kind of been the easier ones to figure out. But I think if schools want to be innovative, we want to be innovative with them to try to help figure out how to make it work for these schools, because the economies of scale and the changing demographics are going to be a major problem if they're not already for some of these school districts. And we want to make sure that the opportunities are there for quality education, just because it's the right thing to do. It's a constitutional responsibility, but also it's the future of our state. It's our future workforce. And so we got to find ways to make these things work.
There's also a bill, I think you mentioned, that addresses election law in Wisconsin.
Yeah, well, there's a package of bills there too, on a high level, to start with. They're continuing our work to make sure that the accountability is there in our elections. I've been saying this for more than a decade now. We want to make it easy to vote, hard to cheat. So that's always the key focus. But I think the biggest one of the bills that I hope will have a positive impact, and it's something I've heard about certainly in the 37th Assembly District, is we're going to require some in-person absentee hours statewide. Right now, it was really up to local governments to do that, and it's not something that we do often, and we certainly don't do it without a lot of thought. But I was hearing more and more from folks in the rural parts of the 37th Assembly District and my colleagues throughout their districts that they didn't like that in the big cities people could go vote for 2 weeks in person, early absentee, and in those towns, the only way they could do it was through mail. They didn't trust the mail system. They wanted to vote early. They wanted to get their vote in for whatever reason. Maybe they weren't available on election day. but they didn't like that they had to trust the mail service when all of these big city folks can go to City Hall or to, in the case of Milwaukee or Madison, to all kinds of voting places. And so this will require even our smallest municipalities to provide some hours. The really tiniest towns, only 10 hours. Then it rolls up based on your number of registered voters to as much as 20 hours over that 2-week period. The town still chooses when in that they're providing those 20 hours. There's some options. I know I've certainly heard from some of them, and I respect that. Some part-time clerks that were worried, hey, I've got a day job too, how do I make this work? We put some things in the bill to say, hey, you could contract with another local government. You could contract with the county. You can use poll workers. It doesn't have to be the clerk. There are ways that they can set this up to allow for this. Understand the concerns, but we tried to make it as reasonable as we could. We're not saying you got to be open for 2 full weeks like these big cities. You just got to provide some time. We put some money in the bill to help fund it, and then some of these other options. So I think it was reasonable because I certainly have heard from folks, and I get it. I mean, you look at all this media coverage of all these people voting early in Madison or even in like Beaver Dam and Waupun, right? Because you can vote during normal office hours in a city like that. But you live in a township, maybe just a few miles out of the city, and your clerk is part-time and they're not offering any hours. And so I understand the frustration. I know some municipalities were great. They offered hours. Their clerks were good about making sure that people knew they could schedule an appointment with them. But not everyone was like that. And so just to bring some uniformity to say, yeah, like this is something that whether we think it's the best way to do it or not, as far as having all this early voting, it's something that the communities have shown they like. People like it. And so we're trying to make it a little bit more fair to have that opportunity for everyone and not just if you happen to live in a big city.
Very good. We're talking to State Representative Mark Bourne about all the things happening in Madison that affect us back in the district. We need to take one last break, but we'll be right back. You're listening to Community Comment on 95.3 WBEV.
Listen to Green Bay football all season long.
That's right, we are back on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge. Here's Terry Bell.
Thank you very much, Jake. Just a few more minutes with State Representative Mark Bourne, but time for you to join the conversation if you like. You can call or text 920-887-9595 or call 885-4446. The floor session's over, but as you mentioned, committee work happens all the time. The Joint Finance Committee, which you are a very important part of, obviously, co-chair, also met last week. Anything that came up that you'd like to share?
Yeah, we met recently. One of the key things with the Finance Committee does now, once the budget is done, is that any bill that has an effect on taxes or an appropriation has to come before the Finance Committee before it can be voted in both houses of the legislature. And so any bill that has spending or tax implications, after it has a public hearing and goes through a standing committee, it also comes through the Finance Committee. And so we had 3 bills like that here recently that all had tax implications. One of them is a good example of local legislation where a legislator hears about something. This one just affects Door County and some community theater type activity up there that is currently taxed, which is something. I mean, the tax code when it comes to property taxes and what's exempt and what's not exempt is just being a nonprofit doesn't automatically make you exempt, so it's super confusing. I dealt with this years ago in the local community theater when I was on the city council. And so this is something similar to that in Door County. And so that legislator is helping carve out some exemptions for that community theater up there. So it can be that specific. We have a more general one that has some impact in this area, looking to create a tax credit for short line railroad improvements. The reason that that's important in this area is that's the type of rail that you see the old Wisconsin Southern trains running on here through Beaver Dam, Randolph, Cambria, that supports our ethanol and vegetable canning factories and things like that here in this region. And it's really an aging infrastructure, and that needs to be maintained, because if we don't maintain that, you're going to see all that stuff moved onto trucks. And the impact that would have on our highways is enormous. And so we're looking to be, so because some people are like, why wouldn't the railroad just pay for that? Or why don't you make the canning factory pay for that? Well, they will. They'll be part of it. It's not, the state's not going to fund, but we're looking to be a partner in it because the costs are going to be high to just have the users do it. But the cost to the state becomes high if we put them on all of our roads. So we're trying to strike a balance there to keep that infrastructure, modern and working for the industries in the area and keep some of that traffic off of our roads. And so that's an important partnership. And the other one was kind of a small but important one on search and rescue dogs and creating some tax exemptions to try to incentivize folks to help with the costs of training and supplies and stuff for that. And so a small thing, but something that we recognized is an industry that's challenged a little bit, and we want to make sure that we have those resources available when we need them in our communities.
All right, very good. Just a few minutes left to go. Tomorrow, opening day for the 9-day gun deer hunting season. Any plans to get out in the woods?
Yeah, I am. I gave up deer hunting quite a few years ago, and we were chatting before we went on air about how it looks like it's going to be mild. And I remember as a 12-year-old in the early years freezing. I thought I was going to freeze to death out there, but thankfully that won't be the case for our folks out there this weekend. But no deer hunting for me anymore. I still do enjoy a little pheasant hunting once in a while and a little duck hunting. Actually, last Friday, just a week ago, I was out duck hunting on Beaver Dam Lake, and well, unfortunately, the guests of honor were hard to find that day. We didn't get too many ducks, but we still had a good time with some friends and family out in the blind. And so, but a great important part of our heritage here in Wisconsin, something that the legislature is a key partner in. Just from things like I mentioned, pheasant and duck hunting, you've got your stamps, that you buy that help with habitat. Your licensing stuff goes into supporting that. This last budget, we put some more money into the trails and trail mapping and into the forestry and habitat restoration and things that are, because we recognize both from the sporting heritage is something that's key, but then it's a key part of our tourism industry too. Folks coming from out of state are a good part of that as well. And so we're going to continue to be a strong partner in that, as we have in many budgets, and certainly want to wish the folks that are getting out there for the next week of the gun deer season safe and hopefully successful gun deer season here in Wisconsin.
Very good. State Representative Mark Bourne, it's been an hour well spent. Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me. We'll see you next month.
You've been listening to Community Comment on 95.3 WBEV, powered by Daily Dodge.
Attention high school sports.